I never thought I'd be sitting in a solicitor's office at 25, clutching my phone like it held the key to my entire future, which, as it turned out, it did. My name is Charlotte, and 3 months ago my father passed away after a long battle with cancer. Richard Bennett had been my world since Mum died when I was 12. He remarried 2 years later to Miranda, a woman 15 years his junior, with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The reading of the will was supposed to be straightforward. Dad had always been clear about his intentions. The family estate, worth nearly £2 million, would go to me. The house in Gloucestershire where I'd grown up, his investment portfolio, everything. Miranda would receive a generous settlement of $300,000 and could stay in the house for 6 months to find her own place. But as I sat across from Mr. Whitmore, our family solicitor for over 20 years, something felt terribly wrong. Miranda perched beside me in her black Chanel suit, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief whilst managing to look absolutely radiant. Her performance of the grieving widow was Oscar-worthy. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion, Miss Bennett," Mr. Whitmore said, his weathered hands shuffling through papers with obvious discomfort. "It appears your father made some significant changes to his will just 6 weeks before his passing." The words hit me like ice water. What sort of changes? Miranda's hand found mine across the mahogany table. Her touch was cold, clinical. "Oh, darling, your father was so worried about leaving you with such a burden. The estate requires so much maintenance, and you're still so young." According to this revised document, Mr. Whitmore continued, clearly uncomfortable, "Mrs. Bennett inherits the primary estate, whilst you receive a trust fund of $100,000, accessible when you turn 30. The room spun. 5 years. She wanted me to wait 5 bloody years for a fraction of what should rightfully be mine. I stared at the will in Mr. Whitmore's hands, at my father's supposed signature at the bottom. Something about it looked off. "I need to see that," I said, reaching for the document. Miranda's grip on my hand tightened. "Charlotte, I know this is shocking, but your father discussed this with me extensively. He felt the responsibility might be too much. He would never." My voice cracked. "Dad would never do this to me." Have you ever had that moment when everything you believed about someone you loved suddenly came into question? When you're sitting there wondering if you ever really knew them at all? The weeks that followed were a blur of legal consultations and sleepless nights. I moved into a tiny bedsit in London, surviving on savings, whilst Miranda settled into my childhood home like she owned it, which apparently she did. Every solicitor I consulted told me the same thing. Challenging a will is expensive, time-consuming, and rarely successful, especially when the deceased appeared to be of sound mind and the document was properly witnessed. But something nagged at me. The handwriting looked right, but the signature— there was something about the way the R curved that didn't match the thousands of birthday cards and school reports I'd kept. Miranda, meanwhile, had wasted no time making her mark on the estate. She'd already started renovations, tearing out Mum's rose garden to install a modern water feature. She'd donated most of Dad's books to charity, including first editions that had been in our family for generations. When I confronted her about it, she simply smiled that cold smile. "Oh, darling, Richard always said he wanted the house to feel fresh and modern. I'm just honoring his wishes." But the final straw came 6 weeks after the will reading. I'd driven to Gloucestershire to collect the last of my personal belongings, photographs, childhood mementos, things Miranda had graciously allowed me to take. As I was packing boxes in my old bedroom, I heard voices from the kitchen below. "Brilliant how quickly you pulled it off," a man's voice said. I didn't recognize it. Well, the old fool was so doped up on morphine towards the end, he barely knew what he was signing. Miranda's laugh was sharp, cruel. The power of attorney made it ridiculously easy. My blood turned to ice. I crept to the top of the stairs, phone in hand. "And the daughter suspects nothing?" the man asked. "Charlotte, please. She's too emotional, too trusting, just like her father. Besides, what can she prove? The will is perfectly legal. Richard's signature, proper witnesses, well, mostly proper." They laughed together, and I felt physically sick. I fumbled with my phone, managing to start recording just as Miranda continued. "The beauty of it is, even if she challenges it, she'll run out of money long before she can prove anything. And by then, I'll have sold the estate and disappeared to the continent. Richard's precious daughter will get nothing. I recorded for another 10 minutes, capturing details about forged documents, bribed witnesses, and Miranda's plans to liquidate everything within the year. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone twice. When I finally made it back to my car, I sat in the driveway of my childhood home and cried, not just for the betrayal, but for my father. He'd trusted this woman, loved her, and she'd manipulated his final moments for her own gain. But as I sat there, something else stirred inside me. Anger, cold, focused rage. She'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was weak. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was planning to destroy everything you held dear? The betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound, doesn't it? The recording was damning, but I needed more. Over the next month, I became obsessed with building an ironclad case. I hired a private investigator named David Chen, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud. What he uncovered made my blood boil. Miranda hadn't just targeted my father. This was her third marriage to a wealthy, older man. Her first husband had died in a suspicious accident just months after changing his will. The second had suffered a heart attack, also shortly after revising his estate plans. Both times, Miranda had inherited everything, and both times, the children from previous marriages had been left with almost nothing. She's what we call a black widow, David explained during one of our meetings. Methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless. The problem is proving it. But Miranda had grown careless. Success had made her cocky. David's investigation revealed she'd been slowly draining my father's accounts for months before his death, transferring money to offshore accounts. She'd also taken out a life insurance policy on him without his knowledge, using the power of attorney he'd granted her during his illness. The breakthrough came when David managed to track down the witnesses to the will. One of them, a young woman named Emma, broke down when David approached her. She'd been Miranda's cleaner and had been paid $5,000 to sign a document she wasn't allowed to read. She had no idea what she was witnessing. She told me it was just paperwork for the house renovations, Emma sobbed. I needed the money so desperately. I'm so sorry. The second witness was harder to crack. James Morrison, a supposed friend of my father's, initially denied everything. But when David presented him with evidence of his gambling debts and the $10,000 payment from Miranda, he finally admitted the truth. She said Richard was too ill to sign it himself, so she guided his hand, James confessed. I thought I was helping a dying man sort his affairs. I never imagined. With this evidence, I finally felt ready to act. But Miranda was already moving faster than I'd anticipated. David called me on a Tuesday morning with devastating news. She's put the house on the market. And Charlotte, she's listed it for significantly under market value. She wants a quick sale. My childhood home, worth nearly $1.5 million, was being sold for $900,000. She was sacrificing hundreds of thousands of pounds just to liquidate quickly and disappear. That evening, I sat in my tiny bedsit, staring at all the evidence spread across my kitchen table. I had recordings, witness statements, financial records. But would it be enough? And more importantly, would I get to court before she vanished with everything? Then I remembered something. Something I'd completely forgotten in all the chaos and grief of the past few months. 3 days before Dad died, when he was barely conscious, my phone had rung. I was sitting beside his hospital bed, and I'd answered without thinking. It was Dad's voice, weak but unmistakably his, leaving me a voicemail. At the time, I'd been too overwhelmed to really listen. I'd saved it, meaning to replay it later, but then he'd passed, and in my grief, I'd forgotten all about it. With trembling fingers, I scrolled through my saved voicemails. There it was. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 72 hours before his death, weeks after Miranda claimed he'd changed his will. I pressed play, and my father's voice filled the tiny room. Charlotte, my darling girl, I know I don't have long left, and there's something I need you to know. Miranda, she's not who we thought she was. I've discovered some troubling things about her past, about her previous marriages. I want you to be very careful. I've made arrangements. The will is unchanged, sweetheart. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what papers they show you, everything goes to you. I've hidden the real will where only you would think to look. Remember the poem I used to read to you when you were little? About the secret garden? The answer is there, my love. Don't trust anyone else with this. Promise me. The message continued for another minute, with Dad expressing his love and his regrets about bringing Miranda into our lives. But I barely heard the rest. I knew exactly where he meant. When I was 8, Dad had carved out a hiding place in the old oak tree in our back garden. He'd shown me how the bark formed a natural compartment, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He'd called it our secret garden, after the book he used to read to me. If there was a real will hidden there, it would prove everything. Have you ever felt the moment when everything suddenly clicks into place? When you realize you've had the key to justice all along? Getting back into the estate wouldn't be easy. Miranda had changed the locks and installed a security system. But I'd grown up in that house. I knew every secret entrance, every loose window latch, every creaky floorboard to avoid. I waited until the following Saturday night. Miranda's car wasn't in the drive. David had mentioned she'd been spending weekends in London, probably moving money around or meeting with potential buyers. The house sat in darkness, looking strange and unwelcoming with her modern security lights casting harsh shadows across the garden. I'd brought a torch, but I barely needed it. I could have found that oak tree blindfolded. It stood at the far end of the garden, ancient and proud, unchanged despite all of Miranda's renovations. As I approached it, memories flooded back. Dad pushing me on the swing that used to hang from its lower branch, teaching me to climb its sturdy trunk, showing me the secret compartment when I was old enough to keep secrets. My fingers found the familiar groove in the bark. The hiding place was exactly as I remembered, though now I had to stretch to reach it. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were documents. My heart pounded as I carefully extracted them. Even in the dim light of my phone torch, I could see my father's handwriting on the envelope. For Charlotte, my beloved daughter. Inside was his real will, dated just 2 weeks before his death, well after the forged version Miranda had produced. In his own handwriting, with his genuine signature that I knew as well as my own, Dad had left everything to me. But more than that, he'd included a letter. "My dearest Charlotte," it read. "If you're reading this, then my worst fears about Miranda have come true. I've discovered that her previous husbands both died under suspicious circumstances, and that she's been slowly draining my accounts. I've tried to confront her, but she's convinced everyone that my illness is affecting my mind. I'm changing the locks on Monday and asking her to leave, but I fear she may try something desperate. This will is my real final testament. I've also documented everything I've learned about her past, and I've been recording our conversations. You'll find everything you need in the safe behind my study bookshelf. The combination is your birthday. Get this to Mr. Whitmore immediately and contact the police. I'm so sorry I brought this woman into our lives, but I promise you, she will not profit from my death. All my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. Even facing death, possibly murder, he'd been thinking of me, protecting me. The combination to his safe, my birthday, of course. He'd never changed it in all the years since Mum died. I made my way to the study, my childhood sanctuary where Dad and I had spent countless hours reading together. Miranda had redecorated here too, but the heavy oak bookshelf remained. Behind it, exactly where I remembered, was Dad's old safe. The click as it opened was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Inside were folders of documents, printed emails, bank statements showing the transfers Miranda had made, and a collection of audio recordings on a small digital device. Dad had been documenting everything, building a case against the woman who was slowly killing him. But the most damning evidence was a letter from a private investigator Dad had hired, detailing Miranda's history. Her real name wasn't even Miranda Bennett. It was Margaret Sullivan. She'd been married 4 times, not twice. 2 husbands had died mysteriously, 1 had survived and was living in hiding in Scotland, and the 4th marriage had been annulled when her previous crimes came to light. As I packed everything into my bag, I heard a car in the driveway. Miranda was back early. I quickly closed the safe and slipped the bookshelf back into place, but I could already hear her key in the front door. There was no way I could make it out through the garden without being seen. I was trapped in the house with a woman who had almost certainly murdered my father. But as I crouched behind Dad's desk, clutching the evidence that would destroy her, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. For the first time since this nightmare began, I held all the cards. Let her come. I was ready. Miranda's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she moved through the house. I could hear her on the phone, speaking in hushed tones about finalizing the sale and transferring the remaining funds. She was closer than I'd thought to disappearing forever. I waited until she'd gone upstairs before slipping out through the French doors in the study. But instead of running, I did something that would have terrified me months ago. I called the police, and then I called Mr. Whitmore. "I need you both to meet me at the estate in 1 hour," I told the solicitor, "and bring a witness. I have something that's going to change everything." The confrontation that followed was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Miranda's face when she walked into the sitting room to find me waiting with Mr. Whitmore, Detective Inspector Sarah Mills, and David Chen was a picture I'll treasure forever. The color drained from her cheeks, but she recovered quickly. "Charlotte, darling, what's all this about? And how did you get in?" "I think you know exactly what this is about, Margaret." The use of her real name hit like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward. "I have everything, Miranda. Dad's real will, his recordings of your conversations, documentation of the money you stole, statements from your bribed witnesses, and evidence of your previous marriages." I held up my phone. "Including that lovely chat you had with your friend about how you manipulated a dying man." Detective Inspector Mills stepped forward. "Margaret Sullivan, I'm arresting you on suspicion of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder." As they read her rights, Miranda's mask finally slipped completely. The grieving widow disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You can't prove any of this," she snarled. "Richard was dying anyway. I just accelerated things." The confession was the final nail in her coffin. The legal proceedings took months, but Miranda, Margaret, was eventually sentenced to 18 years in prison. The investigation into her previous husband's deaths was reopened, and her surviving victim in Scotland finally felt safe enough to come forward with his own evidence. I got everything back: the house, the investments, even the money she'd already transferred. The court ordered full restitution, plus damages for emotional distress. But the real victory was smaller, more personal. 6 months after Miranda's arrest, I was finally able to scatter Dad's ashes in Mum's rose garden, which I'd restored to exactly how she'd designed it. As I stood there, surrounded by the scent of her favorite David Austin roses, I played Dad's voicemail one more time. "Charlotte, my darling girl, everything goes to you." He'd kept his promise, even from beyond the grave. Miranda had been right about one thing: I was too trusting, too emotional. But she'd underestimated what those qualities could accomplish when paired with determination and righteous anger. Sometimes the biggest mistake predators make is assuming their victims will stay victims. The house feels like home again now. I've kept some of Miranda's modern touches. The kitchen renovation was actually quite nice, but the soul of the place is pure Dad and Mum once more. I've even installed a new swing on the old oak tree, ready for the children I hope to have someday. And that voicemail? I've backed it up in 17 different places, just in case. Sometimes people ask me how I found the strength to fight someone so ruthless, so experienced at manipulation and murder. The answer is simple. She made the fatal error of underestimating a daughter's love for her father and a father's love for his daughter. That kind of love doesn't die with the body. It lives on in every fight for justice, every refusal to give up, every moment when you choose courage over fear. Se histórias como essa te prendem, não se esquece de se inscrever no canal e comentar aqui embaixo. Eu leio tudo. And remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply refusing to be silenced.